Hello, I'm Ben. Welcome to the channel. So today we're going to talk about, as a job seeker, the things you have to pay attention to and say and what you should not say in the interview process around some things that recruiters are going to be looking at. Also, talk about the most in-demand careers in 2025, so what's coming. But I'll say this too, by 2025, 97 million new roles should emerge that are more adapted to the new division of labor between humans, machines, and algorithms. That was in a recent study around AI and some of those things. So now's a good time for people to look at the possibility of what they're currently doing going to an AI capable machine versus employing humans. Now, we had this realization in the last century, in the early 1900s, 1920s, where automation took the place of blue-collar jobs. It took the place of what people did. So, for instance, one person would be there and be putting one screw in something. After Ford created the production line, those jobs for people kind of went away, and they were minimalized up into now, current times, because now you have things like laser eyes and things of that nature that can do more specific work more appropriately that used to be required by humans just because of the difficulty of the job. Now you have robotics that can do those things as well with the guidance of laser eyes and things of that nature. So as AI starts to take hold, and it already is. There's already many functions it's doing. A lot of the chat that you do online as a customer or through customer service or through customer complaint programs, those things now are majorly AI. So you're not actually talking to a human. Jennifer on the other end of the line is actually a computer talking back to you. And for the businesses, the way AI works is it's cultivated around what the business does. And so it can answer very specific questions related to that specific business. So AI is pretty impressive. It's frightening for some folks to think that jobs that have always had a customer service individual, a person doing that AI will take those jobs. AI is not going to take the job if you're an in-depth customer service representative. If you're somebody that actually does things specifically and has that care, AI can't mimic that care or that level of empathy that you show your customers. So there's still going to be plenty of jobs where you have to have that, but it's something to think about on what the future competitiveness around gigs may be. So with that being said, it may be time to soup up the resume a little bit and see what jobs are out there for you. If you think that that's a possibility where you work, if it's been mentioned and talked about, then don't give it time to get to you. You need to get out and ahead of that, at least 24 months ahead of that is what I suggest for people. When we go through skills, some of the top related skills that's saying that you'll need in the next few years, the first, number one on the list is AI fluency, the new digital literacy, basically. You have to be as fundamental as a computer literacy is today. AI won't replace humans, but humans who use AI will replace those who don't. It is going to be competitive. I don't think it's that competitive, but that's what this article says. So AI fluency is number one. Digital transformation leadership is number two. I did some of that in my history. When you go out and work in locations to increase automation or change automation or improve automation, there's typically some digital transformation that goes through that. Also, Gen X has lived through DOS and the emergence of Microsoft, and then the emergence of every new era and every new birthday of Microsoft. So digital transformation is going to be something that is continually growing and expanding. So being able to be a leader and lead people through change. Being a change leader is a very difficult thing. If you get those skills, then you'll be usable in many situations that a lot of other folks are not. So the thing about leadership and leading through change is you have to get everybody's buy-in. You have to update that buy-in. You have to check that buy-in, and you have to lead that buy-in through the change, which is something I enjoy doing. But the buy-in, as the project gets long and it gets rough, people fall off pretty quick. So you have to keep them in that. Number three is perpetual learning agility. So everyone should be agile in what they're learning, and you should be perpetually trying to improve yourself. So this is my study. I have quite a few books in this. I mentioned before on the channel, I have a library in the other room. Where I get a lot of that education from is reading. So anytime I get a top 10 books of the year list every year, I try to read all those books in nonfiction. I try to do that annually. I try to read any impressive finance, technology, or business books every year. Anything on emotional intelligence and leadership keys or leadership traits. I try to read all that simply because that's what I do professionally. And then, sales skills and some of that. I do some sales work in some of the businesses that I have, and that's something I try to keep hemmed up as well and try to keep up to date and tuned up, as you say. Strategic foresight and complex problem solving is the next one. As you navigate through roles and move up through roles, the strategic, cannot speak today. Sorry, guys. I mentioned on the channel before, I was hit by an 18-wheeler. So taking the medication for all that, because of the pain that you deal with, it keeps me tongue-tied at times. So even though I normally have the words in my mind works a lot faster than my mouth with the help of those medications. So strategic foresight and complex problem solving are, I think, required for anyone in leadership. And that doesn't mean you have to know the full picture, but what you have to do is own your part of it. And then number 5 is emotional intelligence, which says the human edge. We've talked about emotional intelligence many, many times on this channel. You guys know it's one of my favorite subjects. Emotional intelligence is basically this. When they list out different types of intelligence, emotional intelligence is what a lot of people don't think about. If you look at the time period that we're recently in, where people are triggered and they have no control of themselves, that is the opposite of emotional intelligence. They still have a rating on an emotional intelligence scale, but they happen to be so far at the bottom that you can barely recognize them. So that triggered stuff, that shows a lack of control. If you want to be a professional and you want to be in a situation where you're going to be guiding and safekeeping the careers of other people, your emotional intelligence has to be buttoned up. You have to show empathy. You have to emulate what they're going through so you can have empathy and correctly respond to your people. If you don't have that, then you'll never get to any role where you're leading teams or doing something of that nature. If you don't believe that, look at Dollar General. Okay, look at how their stock has fallen off. They're one of the fastest growing stores there is in the world. They publicly steal from people. They've admitted that. They've had fees and fines for that. But the worst thing they do is how they treat their people. So if you go to a Dollar General store and you talk to the manager, most likely that manager would be too crass to even deal with. They would be the equivalent of someone that would be in a starting position at other stores, because Dollar General is having a tough time hiring people because they treat their people so poorly. So it's cyclical. The business is going to get bad if the leadership is bad. And if the leadership is bad, you're not going to attract new people. So the business is going to continue to get worse. So while they're able to cash in on their locational selectivity, that was strategic thinking, where they picked the locations rurally in areas where there's not much else. That was very strategic thinking. That is giving them some tenured success, even though they're thieves and they treat their people poorly. So there's plenty of lawsuits and plenty of information on lawsuits online. All I have to do is look that up, put Dollar General in the search bar and hit enter and see what comes up for you. So now, with that being said, let's jump into 9 things that recruiters are looking for from applicants and what is important. If you're going to rework your resume, start with this as a starting point. Okay, guys, I look at my resume all the time just to update it because things change, whether I'm looking for gigs or not. And I'm always looking for gigs, contract gigs, to be a consultant for. So I'm always updating that and making it relevant to what I'm looking for or the specific job that I'm looking for at that time. So let's jump into this 9 things recruiters are looking for. Number 1 is the ability to follow directions. You'd be amazed at how many people cannot do that. So when you're going to apply for a job, you need to follow the steps appropriately. And when you have the times and all that, you need to do those things appropriately. If the job listing requires certain documentation or, a resume or an application completed with a cover letter, then make sure you're submitting those things. If you can follow directions there, it's a good example that you can follow directions when you're on the job. Then when you have the interview scheduled and you go in, be on time, be appropriate, be dressed appropriately, do the things that make sense. Each year, there's issues where people are not following directions, and after the interview, even though they might have been the primary candidate, they go down in the stack where they may have been number 1 or number 2. They fall down the stack to 3 or 4. The way that happens when you're applying to places, most employers get a pool of applicants together before they start bringing people in for interviews. So then they have several people to talk to, and they kind of line those out based on best qualified to least qualified. And the things you do during that interview process may move you up and down through that level. Next is accomplishments. On your resume, you don't want it to say everything you've ever done. But in each role, you want to list the accomplishments that stood out to you in those roles. And for example, when your interview process, they may go back to that and say, hey, tell me about this. And you can tell about that specific accomplishment. So you want to have the key points on there to help yourself remember what that was during the period of time. But you don't want to put all the words on that in your application. So accomplishments is the next thing. Career progress is the next. You want to be able to show in your resume that there was a standard career progression through roles. Sometimes resumes, if you don't look at them, the jobs can be here, there, and yonder, right? You're bouncing all over the place. You may have worked for a judge, and then you may have worked for a pet center, and then you may have worked for a nursing home, and then you may have worked at Walmart. But the difference is you started as an administrator, then you started as a shift lead, then you started as a larger lead or manager from that point. Have it where your resume shows the career progress, because you may not have an opportunity to tell them about it, right? So if you were sitting in front of them and they were asking you questions, you may be able to answer to the progression of each role, and it might make sense in a linear way. But if you don't get the opportunity to get in front of them, you want that resume to show that without you speaking to it. You definitely want to be able to speak to it and say what you learned and how you grew and what was exciting about the next opportunity. But make sure you show that it shows career progress from start to finish. Next is clear, correct writing. I can't tell you how many times I got an application and attention to detail was in their skill set. It was in the thing that they said about their skills. But then as I go through the resume, on the top of the resume, the form that they used to do the resume had a title. That title is still on their resume. They didn't delete that off. So they used a resume blank to build their resume, which is fine. But make sure you take off everything that you don't want on there. But also make sure you're typing your resumes and everything up in Word or something like that where it will show you misspelled words, where it will show you grammar issues so you can correct those. If you get to using a bunch of AI and a bunch of sources to write your stuff for you, you're going to run into problems that those things will have textual issues. It won't be correct writing. So one will be past tense versus present tense. And one will use if you talk about Spanish or French or something like that, you have a proper local language, and then you have a more formal language. And if it's between the two, that's going to get in your way. So make sure that you have clear, correct writing. Less words is better. If you have a lot to say, then use the words, but less words is better. Think about these recruiters. They look at hundreds, maybe thousands of resumes a week, right? If that's the case, you want them to take the time to read what you're putting down and to take the time to get through what you're doing, right? So that's the next suggestion I make. The next is color. A lot of resumes, writers, a lot of recruiters, a lot of companies that do professional recruiting, they suggest that you put color in your resume. I have no opinion on that. If a resume comes to me and it's impressively, it's professionally laid out and it's clean and it's easy to get through, I will review that resume. If it's got too much going on everywhere, I'll put that aside. Even if it's a lot of words and it's 3 pages long, if it's incorrect and it makes sense and it's something I can follow easily, I'll read that whole resume. So when it comes down to that, make sure that you're doing anything that you can to make it a little bit more beneficial to you. So if you want to use color, do that. Put some color in your resume, maybe in the title lines or those type things. Formatting and layout is the biggest point, though. That's what I'd focus more on, making sure don't put so much on it that's not clear. Don't get so creative that you have all the clip art and all the graphs and columns and all this stuff if it jumbles the resume up. You want the resume to look clear. You want to be able to start from the top and move to the bottom, or you want to start at the left and move to the right. If you read like we do in America, if you're in other countries that read right to left, then have it linear like that. So format or layout matters. Don't use a bunch of different sizes. Make each, so for instance, your jobs. If you have your job listed on there and you have the title that you had, and then at the company, and then in the town or state, and then the dates, then stick with that on all the jobs. Don't have it mingled differently on each job. Okay, try to have your formatting the same for each position that you're listing. Education, same thing. One of the strongest suggestions I give you, if you're a person that's Gen X or older, if you've gotten recent education, then put the date on there so they can see that you're continuing to get educated and formally chase that improvement. But if you have a degree that's over 20 years old, then put the degree on there, but don't put the date that you got it. Okay, you don't want to age yourself in things and get yourself pushed out of a selection process if people are being ageist, which is inappropriate, but it does happen. So don't do things to hurt yourself, right? Same thing about your address. When a lot of people put their addresses on the resume, there's no use in doing that. What you want to do is put your town and your state and your zip code, but not your address. Nobody needs that. That's a little bit more private, even though they could search you and find that relatively easily. It doesn't need to be on resumes. Just put the town so they can see, well, if you're one town over and it's 7 miles, it's not going to be a problem for me to hire you because you can go 7 miles without too much of a struggle. So that's why you want to put your town, your state, and your zip code on there. That would be my suggestion around format and layout. Also, make sure that the font and the lettering that you're using makes sense, because sometimes some of that lettering, some of those acrylics and those type things, they're hard to read. So make sure you're not creating yourself more difficulty in doing something so creative. Okay. The next piece I would say is around keywords. You want to use keywords around the job titles that you have. So if there's specific role duties in specific positions, then put those things in line, and use those keywords. So recruiters basically don't spend much time looking at an individual resume, only about 7 seconds, according to what Ladders says, which is pathetic. I mean, they should be able to spend at least a minute on a resume, and you can see in a minute's time how long someone spends at jobs. Are the jobs relevant to what you're applying for? Is the history there? But if they only spend 7 seconds, then I don't expect them to get anything out of that. That's ridiculous. But if your resume uses keywords, like if they know they need somebody with fiduciary responsibility that can handle money without having to worry about theft, you need to have those things on there so they can see those keywords that are specific to the roles that you have on your resume. Okay. That's what you want to focus on. You don't want to just put random keywords here and there that don't make sense. Make it readable where it continues with ease. Okay. The next is the length of your resume. Bigger isn't always better. Between the volume of applicants hiring managers deal with and the number of applications that recruiters get, they have their own looming deadlines. They have their own responsibilities they have to get through. They have their own things that demand their attention. So having a hyper long resume doesn't do you any favors. But let's say you're someone like me. You're an old cat that's been in a lot of roles and done a lot of things and had some big impact elsewhere. That resume may take 3 pages. But if they're going to spend the salary to pay someone like myself on those, they're going to need those 3 pages to get that confirmation. Hey, get this guy in, because that may mean they fly me somewhere else across the country to come in and do an interview, right? So it's those type of things where length does matter. You want to do all you can to keep it on 1 page. My suggestion is you don't ever go over 2. Now, I have a resume that I keep on my own computer that has my entire work history on it. And right now that's 4 pages long because it has details about jobs and details specifically about projects that I did or was responsible for, because I want to remember the project, the time, and who the stakeholders were. So on that sheet, I have that printed out, but that's not what I send people if I'm applying to something. If I'm applying for a contract or if I'm applying to a role, I send the resume out that's 2 pages, just because my history and what I've done requires that of me. But if you've worked the same kind of job for multiple years, do not think that 1 page is not enough. 1 page is definitely enough. If you've been in one role for 20 years, or if you've been in one role for 15, your one career job, and you're 15 years here, 5 years in this role, as you move up, put those different roles under different lines so they can see that you got promoted. But that's absolutely perfect. You don't have to have multiple pages. Multiple pages doesn't necessarily mean better. One of the best engineers I ever hired had a PhD and multiple master's degrees in electronic and manufacturing type engineering. And he had a 1-page resume. And it had a little pie chart up top that said where he spent most of his experience in his jobs most of the time, which was kind of cool. But it also had the places where he got his education, had that listed out. That took about that much of the page. So if you can imagine, there was only that much left. But that much of the page was his education and why that was important to him. And it was basically what I said about those key points earlier. It was upgrading himself to the technology that was required. Because unfortunately, some jobs, the software that you have to use for the majority of what you do that updates often, and sometimes companies go away and they fail, and so the primary software that a whole group of people may use may go away, so then they have to update to another one, etc. So that would have a lot to do with resume length. So just look at it, make sure it makes sense, and then the final piece is you're going to have a summary. So people have different opinions about summaries. I'll say this. If you have that summary at the top of your page, the recruiter is going to know very quickly if you're qualified for the role they're looking for or not. But if you don't have that summary specific to that job, that summary can get that recruiter to stop looking right there. So make sure that your summary is not just one fit-all thing. Make sure you're adjusting that to the appropriate jobs you're applying for. So you may have the same resume, but you may have changed the summary for whatever 10 different jobs you're applying to. So the summary should tell the recruiter that they want to talk to you because you know what they're looking for and you have that for them. That's what that summary should tell that recruiter. There was a period of time where people were like, well, don't put that on there. That's nonsense. If you don't put that on there, people might not look at it. They want you to tell a little bit about yourself, and then they should be able to look down beneath that at your accomplishments from job to job, and that should paint a picture of them of why you've been successful and what you should be doing. So the bottom line here is recruiters and hiring managers get a good sense of potential employee by scanning a resume. I scan before I read. And scanning that resume, there has to be things that stick out. And these things that I mentioned are the things that stick out. If you're not doing those things, then your resume will get less attention. You have less success getting that call in. So hopefully this video was useful to you. Hopefully this information is useful to you. I know that looking at a job market that's constantly changing like ours and having competition like AI and those type things, it can seem overwhelming, but don't let it be. If you have to send out 50 resumes to get one person to look at it, then send out 300. And it's ridiculous that that's the case, but AI a lot of times is used to source through resumes. So that's why it's important that that objective or that summary that you have up top be relevant to the job you're applying to. And that's why you want to have it where you are highlighting what you've done and those actions that you've done. And that will help you get in front of someone. And at that point, once you're in front of someone, let the story be showing them what you've done successfully and why you think it would work well for them. And hopefully you'll get the opportunity to prove that in a day-to-day role. I'm Ben. If you like information such as this, please like, please subscribe. If you think of someone that may need this, please share this video with them. You can follow me also on LinkedIn or on Facebook. We have a page there where we share other information more than just the videos. So please take a look at that, like, subscribe here, and maybe subscribe there as well. I'm Ben. Be good.